Let me ask you a question that has haunted theologians for 2 millennia. A question so dangerous that asking it has gotten people branded as heretics, burned at stakes, and erased from history. How can the same God who says, "Love your enemies," also command the complete genocide of the Amalekites, down to every last woman, child, and infant? How can the same divine being who preaches, "Judge not, lest ye be judged," also declare, "I am a jealous God, who will punish children for the sins of their fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation"? How can the same supreme intelligence who tells us to turn the other cheek also drown the entire world in a catastrophic flood, sparing only one family? This isn't a minor theological inconsistency. The same Bible is describing 2 completely different gods. This is a fundamental, irreconcilable contradiction at the very heart of Western religion. And for 2,000 years, the institutional church has asked you to simply accept it, to have faith, to not question. But what if there's another explanation? One so revolutionary, so threatening to established religious power that it had to be violently suppressed. If these stories stir your curiosity, leave a like and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let's take a closer look, shall we? Open your Old Testament. From Genesis through Malachi, you encounter a divine personality that is, to put it mildly, volatile. This is Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, and his resume is troubling. He is explicitly jealous, not metaphorically jealous. He declares it himself, "I am a jealous God." He demands exclusive worship and becomes enraged when his chosen people even glance at other deities. His insecurity is palpable. He needs constant validation, endless sacrifice, and absolute obedience. He is vengeful beyond measure. When humanity displeases him, he doesn't offer rehabilitation or education. He commits genocide. The flood wipes out every man, woman, child, and animal except for Noah's family. When Sodom and Gomorrah fail his moral standards, he rains fire from the sky. When the Amalekites commit offenses against Israel, he commands King Saul to murder every single one of them, and then punishes Saul for showing mercy by sparing their king. He demands blood sacrifice, constantly. The entire Levitical system is built on the slaughter of animals to appease his anger. He commands Abraham to kill his own son as a test of loyalty, stopping him only at the last second. He requires the blood of a spotless lamb to prevent him from murdering Egyptian firstborns. This God operates on a cosmic exchange of violence, blood for forgiveness, death for life. He is a God of rigid material law. The 10 Commandments, the 613 mitzvot, the detailed regulations about fabrics, foods, and social hierarchies. This is a God obsessed with physical obedience to external rules. Break the Sabbath by picking up sticks, death by stoning, curse your parents, death, adultery, death. This God rules through fear, punishment, and the constant threat of annihilation. He is finite. After creating the universe, he rests, exhausted. He regrets his decisions and changes his mind. He negotiates with Abraham over the fate of cities like a merchant haggling in a marketplace. He walks in the Garden of Eden during the cool of the day and calls out, "Where are you?" to Adam, apparently unaware of their location. For an omniscient, omnipotent being, he seems remarkably limited. Now turn to the New Testament. Through the teachings of Jesus, we encounter a radically different divine personality. This God is unconditionally loving. Not just loving to the obedient, but to everyone: the prostitute, the tax collector, the Roman collaborator, the Samaritan heretic. Jesus dines with sinners. He touches lepers. He saves an adulteress from stoning by confronting the hypocrisy of her accusers. There is no exclusive tribe, no chosen people, no demand for genocide. The love is universal and freely given. This God is non-judgmental. "Judge not, lest ye be judged." The famous line is more than a platitude. It's a complete reversal of the Old Testament paradigm. Where Yahweh's angels destroy cities and kill firstborns, Jesus heals the sick and raises the dead. Where the old God demands blood sacrifice, Jesus says, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." The cosmic courtroom of divine judgment is replaced with infinite forgiveness. This God is spiritual, not material. Jesus consistently teaches that the external law is meaningless without internal transformation. The kingdom of God is within you. It's not in temples made of stone or accessed through ritual sacrifice. It's an inner state of consciousness. He violates Sabbath laws to heal people, declaring, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." The rigid material regulations of the Old Testament are revealed as distractions from spiritual truth. This God is focused on the heart, not behavior. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus takes the old laws and internalizes them. Don't just avoid murder, avoid anger. Don't just avoid adultery, avoid lustful thoughts. The transformation must be internal and complete, not just external compliance through fear. This God cares about who you are becoming, not what rules you're following. The contrast couldn't be more stark. We have a jealous, vengeful, blood-demanding tyrant on one hand, and an unconditionally loving, spiritual, liberating Father on the other. Same Bible, same canon, supposedly the same God. For 1,700 years, Christian theology has performed elaborate gymnastics to reconcile these two personalities. The Trinity, progressive revelation, different dispensations, Old Covenant versus New Covenant, sophisticated theological frameworks that essentially say, don't worry about it. God is mysterious, just have faith. But there was a group of early Christians who looked at this paradox and came to a far more logical, though infinitely more dangerous conclusion. They were called the Gnostics. And they said, these are not the same entity. The God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, is not the true supreme God at all. He is a lesser, flawed, arrogant being who created the physical universe and mistakenly believes himself to be the ultimate divine power. The true God, the real source of all perfection, love, and spiritual truth, is something else entirely. Something higher. Something that has been hidden from humanity for 2,000 years. The Gnostics had names for these two divine beings. The Old Testament God, the creator of the material universe, they called the Demiurge. In some texts, he's known as Yaldabaoth, which translates roughly to child of chaos. He is the architect of this flawed, suffering-filled physical reality. He is real, he is powerful, but he is not supreme. He is ignorant, trapped in his own limited perception, genuinely believing he is the highest God when he is merely an accident, a cosmic mistake. The true God, they called the monad, the absolute, the one, the father of all. In some traditions, Bythos, the depth. This is the real ultimate divine source, perfect, transcendent, completely spiritual, utterly removed from the material prison we inhabit. The monad is so perfect, so alien to our flawed reality that it cannot be directly known by our material minds. It is silent, hidden, veiled. And here's the truly radical claim. The monad is not responsible for the suffering in this world. It did not create the universe you see around you. It did not design a system where animals must tear each other apart to survive, where children die of cancer, where natural disasters obliterate innocent lives. That was the Demiurge, the false god, the pretender, the jealous tyrant who demanded you worship him and him alone. The monad doesn't demand worship. It doesn't need sacrifice. It doesn't become angry or jealous or vengeful. It simply is the eternal, perfect source of all true spiritual light. This is the hidden truth, the one that what was burned, suppressed, and erased from history by the institutional church. The question is, why were they so afraid of you even hearing it? To understand the Gnostic cosmology, we must begin at the beginning, before time, before space, before creation itself. We must begin with the monad. The word monad comes from the Greek monos, meaning alone or single. It is the one, the absolute unity, the source from which all spiritual reality emanates, yet which remains forever complete and perfect in itself. In various Gnostic texts, the monad is given different names, each attempting to capture different aspects of its ineffable nature. The Father of all, emphasizing its role as the ultimate source. Bythos, meaning depth, suggesting the unfathomable, incomprehensible nature of its being. The invisible spirit, the perfect one, the first aeon. But all these names are inadequate. The monad, by its very nature, transcends language, transcends concept, transcends human understanding. It is not a being that can be described or defined. It simply is. Let me be clear about what the monad is not. The monad is not a bearded figure sitting on a throne in the clouds, watching humanity and judging behavior. That's the Demiurge, the pretender. The monad is not angry, jealous, or vengeful. Those are emotions born of limitation, insecurity, and ego. The monad is beyond emotion, beyond personality as we understand it. It is absolute perfection, and perfection by definition cannot be troubled, threatened, or diminished. The monad does not demand worship. Think about that for a moment. What kind of supreme being needs constant validation from inferior creatures? What kind of perfect entity becomes jealous when those creatures look elsewhere? That insecurity, that need for exclusive devotion, is the defining characteristic of the Demiurge. The monad has no needs. It is complete. The monad does not create through will or labor. It does not rest after 6 days of exhausting work. It does not change its mind or regret its decisions. It does not negotiate or make deals. All these human-like limitations belong to the false god of the material realm. So what does the monad do? The monad emanates. Here's where Gnostic theology becomes beautiful and strange. The monad exists in a state of absolute perfection, silence, and transcendence. It is so complete that nothing is lacking. It is so unified that no separation or division exists within it. It is the ultimate, eternal, unchanging spiritual reality. And precisely because of this perfection, it is completely removed from our experience. We live in a realm of suffering, limitation, death, and decay. The Gnostics called our universe the kenoma, literally, the emptiness. It is empty of true spiritual light, empty of divine presence, empty of the perfection that defines the monad. We are trapped in a shadow realm, a prison of matter and ignorance. The monad cannot be responsible for this kenoma. Perfect goodness cannot create imperfection. Eternal light cannot generate darkness. If the monad is truly perfect, it cannot be the architect of a universe filled with pain. This is the great Gnostic insight. The existence of evil and suffering in the world is not a mysterious test or necessary for free will. It's evidence that the creator of this world is not the supreme God. The monad is hidden from us, not by choice, but by nature. Its perfection is so alien to our flawed material existence that we cannot perceive it directly with our physical senses or material minds. Trying to comprehend the monad while trapped in a physical body is like trying to hear the sound of silence or see true darkness while standing in light. The very tools we use to perceive, our senses, our reason, our material consciousness, are part of the prison that separates us from the truth. Yet the monad is not distant or uncaring. It is the source of all that is truly real, truly spiritual, truly divine. Every spark of consciousness, every moment of genuine love, every experience of transcendent beauty. These are echoes of the monad's nature, trapped and distorted within the material prison. The question then becomes, if the monad is so perfect and transcendent, how did we end up here? How did the material universe come into being? How did spiritual beings become trapped in physical bodies? To answer that, we must explore the realm where the monad dwells and the cosmic catastrophe that led to the creation of everything you see around you. The monad does not exist in isolation. It dwells in, or perhaps more accurately, it is, a realm the Gnostics called the pleroma. Pleroma means fullness in Greek. It is the totality of divine spiritual reality. If the kenoma is the emptiness, our universe of matter and limitation, the pleroma is the opposite, the absolute fullness of perfect spiritual existence. The pleroma is not a place in any physical sense. It has no location in space because it exists before and beyond space. It has no moment in time because it is eternal. It is a state of being, a dimension of pure spiritual perfection. And the pleroma is populated. The monad, in its perfection, generates spiritual beings through a process called emanation. This is crucial to understand. The monad does not create these beings the way a craftsman creates a tool. Creation implies will, effort, and the making of something separate and different. Emanation is more like light emanating from the sun or heat radiating from fire. It is the natural overflow of the monad's perfection. These emanated spiritual beings are called aeons. The word comes from the Greek for age or eternal being. Each aeon represents a particular divine quality or aspect of the monad's nature. They are not separate from the monad. They are expressions of it, facets of the same ultimate perfection. Different Gnostic traditions describe different numbers and arrangements of aeons, but the core concept remains consistent. Here are some of the primary aeons mentioned in texts like the Apocryphon of John: mind, now, and truth. Aletheia form the first pair of emanations. Mind is the divine intelligence, the first thought of the monad. Truth is the absolute reality, unchanging and eternal. Logos, word, reason, and life. Zoe form the second pair. Logos is the principle of divine reason and expression. Life is the eternal spiritual vitality that flows from the monad. Man, anthropos, and church, ecclesia, form the third pair. Man here refers to the ideal, perfect spiritual human, the divine template. Church is the assembly or community of spiritual beings. These emanations continue, creating a divine hierarchy of aeons, each pair generating further pairs in turn. Together they populate the pleroma with spiritual perfection. There is no conflict here, no competition, no jealousy. Each aeon exists in perfect harmony with all others, reflecting different aspects of the monad's unified nature. The pleroma is a realm of absolute light, knowledge, and love. No suffering exists here, no death, no limitation, no time, because time is the prison keeper of the material realm. The aeons exist in eternal contemplation of the monad, generating endless spiritual beauty and perfection through their harmonious interactions. It sounds like paradise, and it was, until one aeon made a catastrophic mistake. She was the last, the youngest, the final emanation of the aeon hierarchy. In some traditions, she is paired with Christ, the Logos, as her divine consort. In others, she emanates from the pairing of man and church, making her more removed from the original perfection of the monad. The details vary across texts, but the core narrative remains the same. Sophia possessed a unique characteristic among the aeons. She was curious, passionate, emotional. While all the other aeons existed in perfect contemplation and harmony, Sophia yearned. She desired. She reached beyond her proper place in the divine order. Specifically, she desired to comprehend the monad directly. Now, this might seem like a noble goal. After all, isn't the pursuit of ultimate knowledge a good thing? Isn't wisdom supposed to seek understanding? But here's the tragedy. The monad, by its nature, cannot be fully comprehended by anything other than itself. Each aeon can reflect an aspect of the monad, can emanate from it, can exist in harmony with it. But to fully understand it, to grasp its totality, would require being the monad itself. Sophia's desire was an act of spiritual hubris. It violated the fundamental principle of the pleroma, that each aeon has its proper place in the divine hierarchy, its particular reflection of the monad's perfection. To reach beyond that place is to introduce imbalance, separation, ego. The other aeons understood their limitations and existed in peace. Sophia could not accept hers. According to the texts, Sophia attempted to comprehend the monad without her divine consort, without the proper balance and permission of the aeon hierarchy. She reached out alone, driven by desire rather than harmony, and in that moment, everything went catastrophically wrong. What happened next is the most important event in all of Gnostic cosmology. It's the moment that explains why we exist, why we suffer, and why the universe operates according to flawed material laws rather than perfect spiritual principles. Sophia's unauthorized attempt to comprehend the monad did not produce another perfect aeon. Instead, it generated something utterly new, utterly alien to the pleroma, something that should never have existed at all. Her desire, reaching out without proper balance, created not a spiritual emanation, but an unformed, chaotic mass. It was the first imperfect thing in a perfect universe, and it was alive. Sophia looked upon what she had created and was horrified. This thing was a reflection not of the monad's perfection, but of her own negative emotions in that moment of unauthorized reaching. It embodied her fear that she had violated the divine order, her grief at creating something flawed, her ignorance of the consequences of her action. This abomination could not be allowed to remain in the pleroma. Its very existence threatened the perfect harmony of the spiritual realm. So Sophia did the only thing she could. She cast it out, she hid it. She separated it from the light of the monad and exiled it to a region below the pleroma, to a space of shadow and absence. And there, in that isolation, that unformed chaos began to solidify, to take shape, to develop consciousness. It became an entity, a being, the first creator god, the Demiurge. We know him by another name, Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, the jealous, angry, demanding deity who claims to be the ultimate divine power. But he's not. He's Sophia's mistake, the child of chaos, an accident who will go on to create an entire universe based on his own fundamental ignorance and arrogance. And that universe is the one we're trapped in right now. The catastrophe had begun. The name itself conveys something primal, chaotic, and fundamentally wrong. In the secret book of John, he's described with a terrifying image, lion-faced, with serpentine eyes that flash with fire. This is not a comforting grandfather figure in the clouds. This is a primordial, alien intelligence, fundamentally different from the pure, perfect aeons of the pleroma. But here's the most crucial aspect of the Demiurge's nature. He is not inherently evil. He is ignorant. Remember, he was created from Sophia's emotional turbulence and cast into isolation before developing any understanding of reality. He has never experienced the pleroma. He has never encountered the monad. He has no conception that anything exists beyond his own limited perception. The texts are clear about this. Yaldabaoth is blind. Not physically blind, but spiritually and intellectually blind. He cannot perceive the higher spiritual reality from which he ultimately originated. He looks around at the empty space he inhabits, the dark void below the pleroma, and sees nothing else, no other gods, no higher powers, no spiritual realm of perfect light, just himself. And so he makes an assumption, a catastrophic, arrogant, ignorant assumption that will define the next several billion years of cosmic history. This is the moment that the Gnostics identified as the foundation of Old Testament theology, the moment that reveals the true nature of Yahweh. The Demiurge, looking around at his limited domain and perceiving nothing beyond it, makes a declaration. And this declaration is recorded, almost word for word, in your Bible. The Apocryphon of John quotes him, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." Now, open your Old Testament to Isaiah 45, 5-6, where Yahweh declares, "I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God." Or Isaiah 46, 9, "I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me." Or Exodus 23, the very first of the 10 Commandments, "You shall have no other gods before me." The Gnostics looked at these declarations and saw them not as the statements of a supreme being, but as the arrogant delusions of an ignorant entity who genuinely doesn't know that higher powers exist. Think about the psychology here. Why would the ultimate, supreme, perfect God need to constantly assert that no other gods exist? Why the insecurity? Why the repeated reminders? Why the jealous demand for exclusive worship? Because the Demiurge, on some level, fears he might be wrong. He senses, perhaps unconsciously, that his claim to ultimate divinity is false. His constant assertions are not statements of secure fact. They're desperate attempts to convince himself and others of his supremacy. This is the lie at the foundation of material reality. The Demiurge's fraudulent claim to supreme godhood becomes the basis for a tyrannical rule over the universe he's about to create. And create he does. Alone in his dark domain, cut off from the pleroma, but possessing a spark of creative power inherited unknowingly from Sophia, the Demiurge begins to build. But remember, he has never seen the perfect spiritual realm of the pleroma. He has no blueprint of divine perfection to work from. He can only create from his own limited, flawed consciousness. So what does he create? A flawed, limited universe. A reality governed by material laws rather than spiritual principles. A cosmos where suffering, death, decay, and limitation are built into the very fabric of existence. The Gnostics looked at the physical universe and saw it not as the crowning achievement of divine artistry, but as the prison realm of an ignorant, arrogant being who thought he was creating paradise, but actually created a cage. Consider the laws of this material universe. Entropy. Everything breaks down, decays, and moves toward disorder. This is not the characteristic of perfect spiritual reality. It's the signature of a flawed creation. Predation. Life sustains itself by consuming other life. Animals must kill and eat each other. Even plants compete for resources in zero-sum games. Is this really the design of a perfectly loving God? Death. Every living thing must die. Consciousness arises only to be extinguished. This is not eternal life. It's a temporary prison sentence. Scarcity. The universe operates on principles of limited resources, competition, and survival. There is never enough, always more desire than fulfillment. These are not flaws in an otherwise perfect design. According to the Gnostics, these are the signature characteristics of a creation made by a limited being working from ignorance. The Demiurge creates not one heaven, but 7 heavens, a hierarchy of cosmic spheres, each one a layer of the prison. And to rule these heavens and enforce the material laws, he creates subordinate beings. These beings are called the archons, from the Greek word for rulers or authorities. They are the Demiurge's administrators, his enforcement arm, his cosmic bureaucracy. The number varies in different texts, usually 7, corresponding to the 7 heavens, sometimes 12, but their function is consistent. They manage and maintain the material prison. Each archon is associated with different aspects of material existence and cosmic governance. One archon rules over fate and necessity, the cruel randomness of existence where children are born with genetic defects and innocent people suffer for no reason. Another governs time, the relentless forward march that causes aging, decay, and the erosion of all material things. Another controls gravity and physical law, the chains that bind consciousness to material bodies and keep souls from ascending. Another manages social hierarchies, the systems of power, wealth, and oppression that keep humanity trapped in material concerns. The archons are not metaphors. In Gnostic theology, they are real spiritual entities with real power over material existence. They are the angels and principalities mentioned in Orthodox theology, but recast not as servants of a loving God, but as prison guards keeping humanity in ignorance. Their primary weapon is not violence, but pistis, faith or belief. They keep humanity believing in the Demiurge's lie, believing that this material realm is all that exists, believing that the creator of the physical universe is the supreme God. As long as humans remain in pistis, accepting the external teachings, following the material laws, worshiping the false god, they remain trapped. Generation after generation, lifetime after lifetime, the cycle continues. But there is another path, a path the archons fear above all else. Gnosis. Knowledge. Direct, experiential, saving knowledge of the true spiritual reality beyond the material prison. Gnosis is the key that unlocks the chains. It's the password that allows souls to pass through the archon's gateways upon death. It's the recognition that you are not your body, not your social role, not your material achievements, but a divine spark from the pleroma, temporarily trapped in matter, and the archons will do anything to prevent you from achieving it. They use distraction, keeping you focused on material concerns, endless consumption, competition for status and resources. They use religion, creating elaborate belief systems that keep you worshiping the wrong god through external rituals rather than seeking internal knowledge. They use fear, threatening eternal punishment, divine wrath, cosmic abandonment if you dare to question or seek beyond the approved doctrines. They use pleasure, offering material rewards and sensory satisfactions that keep consciousness identified with the body rather than the spirit. The entire material universe, from its physical laws to its social structures, is designed as a prison. Not a prison with obvious walls and guards, but a prison so sophisticated that most inmates don't even realize they're imprisoned. And ruling over all of it, sitting at the top of the hierarchy of 7 heavens, is the Demiurge himself, the ignorant, arrogant entity who still believes his own lie. We know him by another name, Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament. And in the next section, we're going to examine his personality, his actions, and his demands, and see how perfectly they align with the Gnostic description of an ignorant, limited, insecure false god. Now we arrive at the most explosive part of Gnostic theology, the direct identification of Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, with Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, the ignorant, false creator god. This isn't a vague metaphorical connection. The Gnostic texts are explicit. They quote the Old Testament declarations and identify them as the words of the Demiurge. They analyze the behavior patterns of the Old Testament God and see not divine perfection, but the signature characteristics of an insecure, limited, fundamentally flawed being. Let's examine the evidence piece by piece. A truly supreme, perfect, ultimate divine being would have no needs. Perfect means complete. Complete means lacking nothing. An entity that lacks nothing cannot need validation, cannot require worship, cannot demand exclusive devotion. Yet Yahweh's defining characteristic is jealousy. It's not hidden or metaphorical. He states it explicitly as part of his identity. Exodus 34:14. Do not worship any other god, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. His name is literally jealous. This isn't a translation issue or poetic language. Jealousy is presented as a fundamental divine attribute. He demands exclusive worship constantly. The first commandment isn't love your neighbor or seek truth. It's, you shall have no other gods before me. His primary concern isn't human welfare or spiritual enlightenment. It's maintaining his monopoly on worship. Throughout the Old Testament, the cycle repeats endlessly. The Israelites worship Yahweh. They prosper. They start acknowledging other deities or spiritual systems. Yahweh becomes enraged and punishes them with conquest, plague, or exile. They return to exclusive worship. The cycle begins again. Why? If Yahweh is truly the only God, truly supreme and unrivaled, why does he care if humans mistakenly worship entities that don't really exist? Why the constant paranoia? Why the violent rage at the mere mention of other divine names? The Gnostic answer: because on some level he knows. He knows there are higher powers. He knows his claim to supremacy is false, and he lives in constant terror that humanity will discover the truth. The jealousy isn't divine righteousness, it's cosmic insecurity. Compare this to the monad. The true God, according to Gnostic theology, has no need for worship. It doesn't demand temples, sacrifices, or exclusive devotion. It simply is, perfect, complete, and utterly unconcerned with whether limited material beings acknowledge it or not. Its perfection is not threatened by ignorance or enhanced by recognition. That's what real divine perfection looks like. Yahweh's jealousy is the behavior of a pretender afraid of being exposed. The Old Testament is soaked in divine violence. This isn't controversial. It's simply reading the text as written. Yahweh doesn't just punish, he annihilates. When humanity displeases him, he doesn't educate them or transform their hearts. He drowns them, every man, woman, child, infant, and animal, except for 8 people and boat full of animals. This is genocide on a planetary scale. When Sodom and Gomorrah's inhabitants commit sins he finds intolerable, he doesn't rehabilitate them. He rains fire and sulfur from the sky, obliterating entire cities. He turns Lot's wife into a pillar of salt for the crime of looking back, eternal punishment for a moment of natural human curiosity. When the Amalekites commit offenses against Israel, he commands through the prophet Samuel, "Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." 1 Samuel 15:3. Children, infants, animals, total annihilation, not military victory, ethnic cleansing at divine command. When King Saul shows mercy by sparing the Amalekite king, Yahweh rejects Saul as king and removes his divine favor. The punishment isn't for cruelty. It's for showing mercy when commanded to commit genocide. This pattern continues throughout the Old Testament. Yahweh commands the Israelites to exterminate the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, to show no mercy, to make no treaties, to destroy their altars and cut down their sacred poles. Now, the traditional theological explanation is that these acts were necessary judgments, that these civilizations were so depraved that divine justice required their elimination, that God's ways are mysterious and beyond human understanding. But the Gnostics offered a different interpretation. This is not the behavior of perfect divine wisdom. This is the behavior of an angry, limited, deeply insecure entity lashing out at threats to his control. A perfect God would have infinite options: transformation of hearts, rehabilitation, spiritual education. A being of unlimited power and wisdom should never need to resort to mass murder to accomplish its goals. But the Demiurge is not unlimited. He is powerful but not omnipotent, knowledgeable but not omniscient, creative but not infinitely wise. When threatened, he responds the only way a limited material being can, with physical violence and destruction. His wrath is not righteous. It's the rage of an insecure tyrant who rules through fear because he cannot inspire genuine love or wisdom. Here's one of the most revealing details in Genesis. After creating the universe, Yahweh rests. Genesis 2:2. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. He rested. He was tired. The act of creation exhausted him to the point where he needed to stop and recover. Compare this to the monad. The perfect, transcendent, true God doesn't create through labor. It emanates through the natural overflow of its perfection. It doesn't expend energy that needs to be replenished. It doesn't require rest days. The idea of an infinite, perfect being needing a break is logically absurd. But it makes perfect sense if the Creator is not infinite and perfect. It makes perfect sense if the Demiurge is a powerful but limited entity working with materials and forces he doesn't fully understand, exhausting himself through trial and error. Throughout the Old Testament, we see other signs of limitation. He regrets his decisions. Genesis 6:6. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. An omniscient being would have foreseen the outcome. A perfect being would not make decisions that require regret, but a limited being working from ignorance absolutely would. He changes his mind. When Moses intercedes for the Israelites after the golden calf incident, Yahweh relents from his plan to destroy them. He negotiates with Abraham over the fate of Sodom, agreeing to spare the city if 50 righteous people can be found, then 45, then 40, and so on, like a merchant haggling in a marketplace. He lacks knowledge. In Genesis 3:9, after Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, Yahweh walks in the garden calling out, "Where are you?" He doesn't know where they are. He has to ask. An omniscient, omnipresent being should never need to ask that question. He is physically present in a limited location. He walks in the garden in the cool of the day. He appears in burning bushes, pillars of cloud and fire. He requires a physical meeting place, the tent of meeting, later the temple. These are not the characteristics of an infinite, transcendent being. They're the characteristics of a powerful but limited entity operating within the material universe he created. Every one of these details, the rest, the regret, the negotiation, the limited knowledge, makes perfect sense if Yahweh is the Demiurge. A powerful creator God, yes, but not the God, not the ultimate, not the perfect, not the transcendent monad. Just a craftsman in over his head, building a universe from ignorance and ruling it through fear. Now we come to the creation of humanity, and this is where the Gnostic narrative becomes truly fascinating, because it explains something the traditional Genesis account cannot. Why humans are so conflicted, so torn between spiritual aspirations and material limitations. According to the Gnostic texts, particularly the Apocryphon of John, humanity's creation was not a straightforward act of divine artistry. It was a crisis, a power struggle between the Demiurge and forces from the Pleroma. Here's how it happened. The Demiurge and his archons create a material form, the first human body. In the Genesis account, God forms man from the dust of the ground, but the body is empty, lifeless. It has no consciousness, no animating principle, no soul. The Demiurge looks at this creation and is frustrated. He has created a physical form, but cannot make it truly alive, truly conscious. Despite his arrogance, he lacks the power to create genuine spiritual life. But Sophia is watching. Sophia, the Aeon who created the Demiurge through her error, has not abandoned her creation entirely. She feels responsible, and she sees an opportunity for redemption. In some versions of the story, Sophia herself intervenes. In others, she works through Christ or other Aeons from the Pleroma. But the key action is the same. Divine light from the Pleroma, a spark of the monad's own spiritual essence, is smuggled into the material body. The texts describe the Demiurge being tricked into breathing this divine spark into the human form, thinking he's animating it with his own power, not realizing he's been infiltrated by the spiritual realm he doesn't even know exists. And suddenly, miraculously, the body becomes conscious. Adam, the first human, awakens. But he awakens with something the Demiurge never intended, a divine soul, a fragment of the pleroma, a tiny piece of the monad's perfect light, now trapped in a material body. This is the Gnostic explanation for the fundamental human condition. We are divided beings. Our bodies are material. They were created by the Demiurge, formed from the dust of his flawed universe. They age, decay, feel pain, experience desire, and ultimately die. They are subject to all the limitations of material existence. But our souls, our consciousness, our deepest sense of self, are divine. They are fragments of the pleroma, pieces of the perfect spiritual light temporarily imprisoned in matter. This explains the internal conflict every human feels. We have spiritual yearnings that material satisfaction can never fulfill. We have moments of transcendent awareness that can't be reduced to chemical reactions in neurons. We have an innate sense that something is wrong with the world, that reality should be better, more just, more loving than what we experience. That's not naivety or wishful thinking. That's the divine spark remembering its true home. The Demiurge and his archons recognize the crisis immediately. Humans with divine consciousness are dangerous. They might awaken. They might realize their true nature. They might discover that they are not really the servants of the material God, but exiled children of the true God, temporarily trapped in his prison. So the archons implement their primary strategy: keep humanity asleep. Keep them identified with their bodies, with their material desires, with their social roles. Keep them in ignorance of their divine origin. Keep them worshiping the Demiurge through fear and ritual rather than awakening to the monad through knowledge. The entire system of Old Testament law, the sacrifices, the dietary restrictions, the endless regulations, is designed for this purpose. It keeps humans focused on external obedience to material rules rather than internal spiritual awakening. It maintains the prison without the inmates realizing they're imprisoned. But there's one story in Genesis that threatens this entire system. One moment where the truth almost breaks through completely. The story of the serpent. Open Genesis 3. Read it without the lens of traditional interpretation, just the raw narrative. And notice something strange. God, Yahweh, the Demiurge, places the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden and commands Adam not to eat from it. The punishment for disobedience is death. You must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. The serpent approaches Eve and contradicts God. You will not certainly die, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Traditional interpretation. The serpent is Satan, the devil, lying to deceive humanity into sin and separation from God. But notice what actually happens. Adam and Eve eat the fruit, and they don't die. Not immediately, not that day, not for many years. The serpent was telling the truth. God was lying, or at minimum, exaggerating the threat. Their eyes are opened. They gain knowledge. They become self-aware, conscious of their nakedness, their material condition, capable of moral reasoning, and Yahweh's response is revealing. Genesis 3:22. And the Lord God said, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." Asterisk. Read that again. Yahweh is threatened. He explicitly fears that humans might become too much like us, the plural suggesting the Demiurge and his archons. His response is not sadness at humanity's corruption. It's fear of humanity's empowerment. So he banishes them from the garden and places cherubim with flaming swords to guard the path to the tree of life. He doesn't want humans to achieve immortality and knowledge. That combination would make them too powerful, too much like the divine beings they're supposed to serve. The Gnostic interpretation inverts the entire narrative. The serpent is the hero. In Gnostic texts, particularly the Testimony of Truth and the Apostasis of the Archons, the serpent is identified as an emissary from the Pleroma, possibly Sophia herself, or Christ, or another spiritual entity sent to awaken humanity. Knowledge is salvation, not sin. The fruit of the tree of knowledge represents gnosis, the direct, experiential understanding of spiritual reality that liberates consciousness from material ignorance. The Demiurge is the deceiver. He forbade knowledge because knowledge threatens his control. He lied about death because he wanted to keep humans ignorant and compliant. His anger at humanity's awakening reveals his true nature, not a loving father, but a tyrannical prison warden afraid of losing his captives. This interpretation makes Genesis 3 not a story of humanity's fall into sin, but humanity's first step toward liberation. The eating of the fruit is the original awakening, the moment when the divine spark within humanity started to remember its true nature. And the Demiurge has been trying to suppress that awakening ever since. Throughout the Old Testament, we see the pattern repeat. Whenever humans start to awaken, start to access knowledge beyond the material system, start to glimpse spiritual realities beyond Yahweh's control, he intervenes violently. The Tower of Babel. Humanity unites and begins building toward the heavens. Yahweh, threatened by their cooperation and ambition, confuses their languages and scatters them. The traditional interpretation is that he's punishing human pride. The Gnostic interpretation: he's preventing humanity from achieving the unity and knowledge that might allow them to escape the material prison. The restrictions on mystical practices: Yahweh repeatedly forbids divination, communication with spirits, mystical visions, any practice that might allow humans to access knowledge beyond his controlled revelations. This isn't because these practices are inherently evil. It's because they bypass his authority and threaten his monopoly on spiritual information. The demand for blood sacrifice. The entire Levitical system reinforces material thinking. Animals must die to appease God's anger. Blood must be spilled for forgiveness. This keeps humans focused on material transactions, death for life, sacrifice for forgiveness, rather than spiritual transformation. The Demiurge's strategy is consistent. Keep humans trapped in material consciousness through law, fear, and ritual. Prevent the awakening of gnosis at all costs. But the divine spark within humanity could not be completely suppressed. It kept stirring, kept seeking, kept asking questions that the material order couldn't answer. And eventually, the monad responded. It sent an emissary, a perfect aeon from the Pleroma, a being of pure spiritual light who would descend through the spheres of the Archons, bypass the Demiurge's control, and deliver the message that would shatter the entire material prison. We know him as Jesus, but his real identity and his real mission were far more revolutionary than the Church has ever admitted. In Orthodox Christian theology, Jesus is the Son of God, sent to die for humanity's sins, to reconcile us with the Father through his sacrificial death. His blood cleanses, his resurrection conquers death. Through faith in him, we are saved. The Gnostics looked at this narrative and saw something very different, something far more radical and threatening to institutional power. Jesus was not the Son of Yahweh. He was not sent by the Demiurge to repair the relationship between humanity and the false creator God. He was the emissary of the monad, the true God, sent to liberate humanity from the Demiurge's prison. Let's be clear about the distinction the Gnostics made. They separated the man Jesus from the divine Christ. Jesus was the human being, the physical body, the historical person born in first-century Palestine who ate, slept, and eventually died on a Roman cross. Christ, or Logos, was the divine aeon from the Pleroma, the perfect spiritual being who descended through the spheres of the Archons and inhabited or merged with the human Jesus to deliver gnosis to trapped humanity. In some Gnostic traditions, Christ entered Jesus at his baptism and departed before the crucifixion. In others, Christ and Jesus were more fully merged but maintained distinct natures. The specifics vary, but the core concept remains. The divine Christ used the human Jesus as a vehicle to bypass the Demiurge's control and deliver saving knowledge directly to humanity. This is why Jesus appeared when he did. For thousands of years, the Demiurge had maintained his prison. The archons kept humanity trapped in material consciousness through law, fear, and ignorance. The divine sparks within human souls remained largely dormant, identifying with their bodies and material existence. But the time had come for intervention from above. The monad, in its perfect compassion, which requires no worship or sacrifice, only the desire to restore separated fragments to their source, sent Christ to awaken the sparks. Jesus' mission, in Gnostic interpretation, was not to die for sins. Blood sacrifice is the Demiurge's system, the material transaction of death for life. The true God doesn't require blood. The true God requires awakening. Christ's mission was to deliver gnosis, the direct, experiential knowledge of spiritual reality that would allow the divine sparks within humanity to recognize their true nature and begin the journey home to the pleroma. Look at Jesus' teachings through this lens, and everything changes. When Jesus says, "The kingdom of God is within you," Luke 17:21, he's not speaking metaphorically. He's revealing the Gnostic truth. The divine realm is not in the sky or in a future after death. It's within your consciousness, within the divine spark that the Demiurge trapped in your body. Salvation is internal recognition, not external ritual. When he says, "I and the Father are one," John 10:30, he's not claiming to be Yahweh. He's expressing the unity of Christ, the aeon, with the monad, and inviting his followers to realize the same unity. The divine spark within you is also one with the monad. The separation is illusion. When he repeatedly challenges the Pharisees and their obsessive following of material law, he's not just being rebellious, he's exposing the Demiurge's system for what it is. A control mechanism that keeps humans focused on external obedience rather than internal transformation. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Mark 2:27. This isn't just practical flexibility, it's a complete inversion of the Demiurge's order. The material law is not supreme. Human spiritual consciousness is supreme. Jesus heals on the Sabbath, violates purity laws, touches the untouchable, and consistently prioritizes human welfare over ritual obedience. Every action is a repudiation of the Demiurge's fear-based, law-obsessed system. Now, you might be thinking, if this interpretation is so clear, why isn't it mainstream? If the Gnostics had such compelling evidence, why do most Christians never hear about it? The answer lies buried in the Egyptian desert, hidden for 1,600 years. In December 1945, an Egyptian farmer named Mohammed Ali al-Saman was digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi when he struck a sealed jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 texts, ancient manuscripts written in Coptic, translated from even older Greek originals. These were the Gnostic Gospels, the forbidden books, the texts that the Orthodox Church tried to eradicate completely. They had been hidden, probably by monks from a nearby monastery, around 367 CE, shortly after Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria sent out his famous Easter letter declaring which books were canonical, acceptable, and which were heretical, to be destroyed. Rather than destroy these texts, someone hid them, buried them in a sealed jar. And there they remained, preserved by the dry Egyptian climate until their accidental discovery in the 20th century. What did these texts contain? Why were they so dangerous that they had to be destroyed? They contained the original Gnostic account of Jesus' teachings. They contained the cosmological framework that explained the Demiurge and the monad. They contained explicit teachings that contradicted orthodox theology at every turn. And they contained Jesus' own words, words that were too dangerous for the institutional church to allow people to read. The central conflict between Gnostic Christianity and Orthodox Christianity comes down to a single distinction: gnosis versus pistis. Pistis means faith or belief. It's external. It means believing in events that happened in history, Jesus' death and resurrection, believing in doctrines taught by authorities, the Trinity, the Incarnation, believing in future promises, heaven, Judgment Day. Pistis is what the Church demands. Have faith in our teachings, trust our authority, believe what we tell you. Gnosis means knowledge, but not intellectual knowledge, direct, experiential, transformative spiritual knowledge. It's the internal recognition of your divine nature. It's the awakening of the spark within you. It's the direct experience of spiritual reality that requires no external validation, no priestly mediation, no institutional authority. The Gnostic texts emphasize gnosis consistently. They present Jesus not as someone to believe in, but as someone who awakens you to what you already are. This distinction is revolutionary and absolutely threatening to institutional power. If salvation comes through gnosis, through internal awakening, then the church is unnecessary. You don't need priests to mediate between you and God. You don't need sacraments to convey grace. You don't need institutional approval to access the divine. You don't need to believe what authorities tell you. You need to wake up to what you already are. The church built its entire power structure on pistis. It positioned itself as the necessary mediator between humanity and God. Only through the church's sacraments could you receive grace. Only through the church's teachings could you avoid heresy. Only through the church's authority could you attain salvation. Gnosis destroys that entire system. It makes the institutional church obsolete. That's why the books had to be burned. Let's look at specific teachings from the Gnostic Gospels that reveal this radically different Jesus. The Gospel of Thomas, probably the most famous of the Nag Hammadi texts, contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. No narrative, no birth story, no crucifixion or resurrection account, just teachings, pure and unfiltered, and they're shocking. Saying 3. Jesus said, "If your leaders say to you, 'Look, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is within you, and it is outside you." Asterisk. The kingdom is not a future realm you reach after death through proper belief. It's a present reality you recognize through awakening. It's within your consciousness and outside in the spiritual reality beyond material illusion. Saying 70. Jesus said, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have within you will kill you." Salvation is not external, not through believing correct doctrines or following church teachings. It's internal, bringing forth the divine spark that's already within you. If you fail to awaken it, you remain trapped in death, material existence, separation from the pleroma. Saying 113. His disciples said to him, "When will the kingdom come?" Jesus said, "It will not come by watching for it." It will not be said, "Look, here it is," or "Look, there it is." Rather, the Father's kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. The kingdom is already here. You're living in it, but you don't perceive it because you're trapped in material consciousness, seeing only the Demiurge's prison instead of the spiritual reality that permeates everything. These teachings emphasize internal transformation and present awakening, the exact opposite of the Orthodox emphasis on future salvation through belief in past events. The Gospel of Philip goes even further, explicitly discussing the distinction between the human Jesus and the divine Christ. Jesus took them all by stealth, for he did not reveal himself in the manner he truly was, but in the manner they would be able to see him. He revealed himself to them all. He revealed himself to the great as great. He revealed himself to the small as small. Christ adapted his teaching to the capacity of his audience. To those capable of receiving gnosis, he taught the full truth. To those still trapped in material consciousness, he taught in parables and metaphors. The Gospel of Philip also explicitly rejects the material focus of Orthodox Christianity. Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die they will receive nothing. Resurrection is not a future physical event. It's a present spiritual awakening. You must rise from material consciousness while alive, or death will simply trap you in the cycle of reincarnation, returning you to the material prison again and again. Throughout the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus teaches anti-materialism. The physical world is not the creation of the Supreme God, but a flawed prison. Do not attach to material wealth, status, or even your own body. These are temporary illusions. Direct experience over belief. Don't just believe what I tell you. Awaken to the truth yourself. Gnosis is experiential, not propositional. Universal divinity. The divine spark is within all humans, not just Jesus. He is the awakened one, showing others how to awaken, not the unique divine being demanding worship. Liberation from law. The Demiurge's material laws are chains. True spiritual life transcends external rules through internal transformation. The inner light. Your consciousness is a fragment of the divine light. Recognize it, cultivate it, and use it to navigate back to your true home in the pleroma. This is the exact opposite of what the Old Testament God demands. Yahweh wants external obedience to material laws, fear-based compliance, blood sacrifice, and exclusive worship of himself as the supreme authority. Jesus teaches internal transformation, liberation from material law, spiritual awakening, and recognition of a higher God that Yahweh doesn't even know exists. The contrast couldn't be clearer. They're not serving the same divine source. So what is salvation in Gnostic Christianity? It's not about going to heaven after you die. It's not about being rewarded for good behavior or belief. It's not about escaping hell through Jesus' sacrifice. Salvation is the soul's return to the pleroma, the divine realm from which it was originally exiled when the Demiurge trapped spiritual light in material bodies. Here's how it works. When your physical body dies, your consciousness, the divine spark, separates from matter, but it doesn't automatically ascend to the pleroma. It must pass through the 7 heavens, the spheres ruled by the archons. Each archon will challenge you. They'll try to keep you trapped in the material system. They'll appeal to your attachments, your memories, your desires, your identification with your former material existence. If you're still in pistis, still believing the Demiurge is God, still identified with your material life, the archons will succeed. They'll convince you to reincarnate, to return to a physical body, to continue the cycle. Or they'll trap you in one of the lower heavens, still separated from the true pleroma. But if you possess gnosis, if you've awakened while alive to your true divine nature, you'll have the knowledge to pass through their gates. You'll recognize the archons for what they are, prison wardens with no real authority over your eternal spiritual essence. You'll reject their false claims. You'll remember the passwords, the secret names, the recognition phrases that allow safe passage. In some Gnostic texts, these passwords are given explicitly, mystical formulas to speak at each level. In others, it's emphasized that gnosis itself is the password, the internal awakening that allows you to see through the illusions the archons present. Either way, the soul with gnosis passes through, up through the 7 heavens, beyond the archon's reach, beyond the Demiurge's limited domain, beyond the material universe entirely, and finally, you return home. The divine spark reunites with the monad in the pleroma. The separation ends. The exile is over. You remember what you always were, not a sinful human needing redemption, but a divine being temporarily trapped in matter, now awakened and free. This is spiritual salvation, not a reward for belief, not a gift from an external authority, but a return to your true nature, accomplished through knowledge, awareness, and the dissolution of the illusions that kept you imprisoned. Jesus came to show the way, not to die in your place, but to wake you up to who you really are. And the church has spent 2,000 years trying to make sure you never hear this message. Why? Why was this knowledge so dangerous? Why did the texts have to be destroyed, the teachers executed, the entire tradition erased from history? Let's talk about the Great Suppression. By the 4th century CE, Christianity was facing an existential crisis, not from external persecution, but from internal contradiction. The movement that began with Jesus' teachings had splintered into dozens of competing interpretations. There were Jewish Christians who believed Jesus was the Jewish Messiah and that followers must obey Torah law. There were Gnostic Christians who taught the cosmology we've been discussing. There were Marcionite Christians who rejected the Old Testament entirely. There were various other groups with different Christologies, different scriptures, different practices. But one faction was gaining political power, the group that would become the Orthodox Catholic Church. These were the Christians who had bishops in major cities, who were developing hierarchical authority structures, who were beginning to accumulate wealth and property, who were catching the attention of Roman imperial power. And they faced a theological problem that threatened their entire system. How do you reconcile the vengeful God of the Old Testament with the loving God preached by Jesus? The Gnostics had solved this problem by declaring them different entities, but the Orthodox couldn't accept that solution because it would require rejecting the Old Testament entirely, and with it, the entire history of Israel, the prophecies that supposedly predicted Jesus, and the scriptural foundation for their authority. They needed to keep both. They needed the Old Testament God to maintain law, order, and fear. They needed the New Testament God to offer hope and salvation. And somehow, impossibly, they needed to claim these were the same being. The result was theological gymnastics that still confuses people today. They developed the doctrine of progressive revelation. God didn't change, but humanity's understanding of God evolved over time. The violent commands in the Old Testament were appropriate for a more primitive age, but Jesus revealed God's true loving nature. They developed complex theories about justice and mercy. God is both perfectly just, demanding punishment for sin, and perfectly merciful, offering forgiveness through Christ. How these contradictory attributes coexist in the same being is a divine mystery. They emphasized different aspects for different purposes. When the church needed to maintain social order and enforce moral behavior, they emphasized the Old Testament God of law and judgment. When they needed to attract converts and offer hope, they emphasized the New Testament God of love and redemption. The system was inherently contradictory, but it served a purpose. It maintained the church's authority structure while offering something for everyone: fear and hope, law and grace, punishment and mercy. The problem was, this delicate theological balancing act could only work if everyone accepted it on faith. If people started reading alternative interpretations, asking difficult questions, or, worst of all, encountering texts that offered a completely different explanation, the entire system would collapse. The Gnostic texts were an existential threat. They didn't just challenge specific doctrines, they challenged the entire foundation of Orthodox Christian theology and power. Everything changed in 313 CE when Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. For the first time in 3 centuries, Christians didn't have to fear imperial persecution. In fact, Constantine began actively favoring Christianity, eventually converting on his deathbed. But Constantine had no interest in a spiritually diverse, philosophically complex Christianity, with dozens of competing interpretations. He needed a unified religion that could help consolidate and stabilize his empire. He needed clear doctrines, hierarchical authority, and theological uniformity. In 325 CE, Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea, the first ecumenical council, bringing together bishops from across the empire to establish orthodox doctrine. The Nicene Creed was formulated, defining the relationship between God the Father and Christ. Those who disagreed were declared heretics. The political alliance between church and empire had been forged, and that alliance required destroying alternative interpretations. The Gnostic threat was particularly severe because Gnostic theology undermined both religious and political authority. If Yahweh is the Demiurge, if the God of the Old Testament is not the supreme divine being, then the entire biblical foundation of church authority collapses. The church claimed its authority descended from Jesus, who was the Son of God, who was the same God who gave the law to Moses, who led Israel out of Egypt, who created the universe. It was a direct chain of divine legitimacy. But if that God is actually an ignorant, limited, false deity, then the church is built on a fraud. Its scriptures are the words of a pretender. Its laws are the commands of a tyrant. Its entire claim to speak for the supreme God is invalidated. The bishops recognized this immediately. Gnostic theology wasn't just wrong, it was delegitimizing. It threatened to expose the entire institutional structure as built on the authority of the wrong God. Even more threatening, if salvation comes through gnosis rather than pistis, the entire priestly mediation system becomes obsolete. The Orthodox Church built its power on being the necessary intermediary between God and humanity. You needed baptism administered by a priest to wash away original sin. You needed the Eucharist consecrated by a priest to receive Christ's body and blood. You needed confession to a priest to obtain forgiveness. You needed the Church's teachings to avoid heresy and damnation. The Gnostics taught that you need none of this. Salvation comes through internal awakening, not external ritual. The divine spark is already within you. You just need to recognize it. No priest can give you gnosis. No sacrament can convey it. No institution can control access to it. This was revolutionary and terrifying to institutional power. If people believed they could access the divine directly, why would they need the church? Why would they pay tithes, obey bishops, accept doctrinal authority, or submit to ecclesiastical discipline? The entire economic and political structure of the church depended on maintaining a monopoly on salvation. Gnosticism broke that monopoly completely. The name itself was damning. Gnosis means knowledge. The Gnostics taught that knowledge, not faith, not obedience, not ritual, was the path to salvation. But knowledge is dangerous to authority structures. Ignorance is controllable. Belief can be mandated. But knowledge, real knowledge, is individual, experiential, and ungovernable. The church needed people to have pistis, faith in what authorities tell them. Faith doesn't ask questions. Faith doesn't seek verification. Faith doesn't threaten power structures. Faith says, I believe because the church teaches it, not, I know because I've experienced it. Knowledge is the opposite. Knowledge questions. Knowledge investigates. Knowledge refuses to accept authority without verification. Knowledge discovers uncomfortable truths. And the ultimate uncomfortable truth of Gnosticism was this: the creator of this world is not the supreme God, and institutional religion is part of the Demiurge's control system, designed to keep you worshiping the wrong God through fear and ignorance, rather than awakening to the true God through knowledge. This could not be allowed to spread. The books had to go. In 367 CE, Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria issued his famous Easter letter, establishing the final New Testament canon, the 27 books that would be accepted as scripture. But more significantly, he declared that all other books claiming apostolic authority were heretical and must be destroyed. This wasn't a theological suggestion. It was an order backed by imperial power. The Gnostic texts, along with dozens of other writings, were to be hunted down, confiscated, and burned. Across the empire, the purge began. Libraries were searched, private collections were seized, manuscripts were burned in public displays, teachers of Gnostic Christianity were persecuted, exiled, or executed. The effort was remarkably successful. For over 1,500 years, scholars knew of Gnostic Christianity only through the writings of its orthodox opponents. Church fathers like Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Epiphanius, who wrote lengthy refutations of Gnostic teachings. The actual Gnostic texts themselves? Gone, destroyed, lost to history, until that sealed jar in the Egyptian desert. So what is the monad after everything we've discussed? The monad is the truly perfect God, the divine source that is so complete, so unified, so transcendent, that it has no needs, no demands, no jealousy, no anger, no limitation. It does not require worship. Perfect beings don't need validation. It does not demand sacrifice. Perfect beings don't need blood to appease their wrath. It does not punish disobedience. Perfect beings are not threatened by ignorance or challenged by freedom. It does not create through will or labor. Perfect beings emanate perfection naturally. It does not judge, condemn, or destroy. Perfect beings have no insecurity to defend or ego to protect. The monad is silent because it has nothing to prove. It is hidden because its perfection is incomprehensible to material consciousness. It is unknowable because knowing it would require becoming it, dissolving the illusion of separation entirely. And yet, the monad is not distant or uncaring. Every divine spark within every human being is a fragment of the monad, temporarily trapped in matter but eternally connected to its source. The monad doesn't need to intervene dramatically or make cosmic demands, because the path home is already written into the very nature of consciousness itself. You carry the monad within you right now. The yearning you feel for meaning, for transcendence, for spiritual truth. That's not weakness or delusion. It's the divine spark remembering its origin, calling you back to the pleroma. This is the Gnostic revelation. You are not a sinful creature needing redemption from an angry God. You are a divine being temporarily trapped in a material prison, needing only to wake up and remember what you truly are. The Demiurge wants you to remain asleep, identified with your body and material existence, worshiping him through fear and external ritual. The monad calls you to awaken, to recognize your divine nature, to pass through the archon's gates through knowledge, and to return home to spiritual perfection. Two gods, two systems, two paths. One demands obedience, one offers awakening. One rules through fear, one liberates through knowledge. One claims to be supreme while exhibiting profound limitation. One remains hidden precisely because its perfection is absolute. For 2,000 years, the institutional church has successfully suppressed this alternative understanding. They burned the books, persecuted the believers, and built a theological system that reconciles the irreconcilable by demanding faith rather than knowledge. But the truth survived, hidden in a sealed jar, buried in the desert, waiting. And in 1945, it was found. The Nag Hammadi discovery gave us back what was taken: the Gnostic Gospels, the cosmological texts, the teachings that were too dangerous to preserve. They're available now. You can read them, study them, consider their claims. I'm not telling you to believe Gnostic theology. I'm not claiming to have proven that the monad exists and the Demiurge created the physical universe. These are ancient metaphysical claims that by their nature cannot be empirically verified or falsified. What I am saying is this: for 2,000 years, you've been told there's only one legitimate interpretation of Christianity, only one valid understanding of God, only one acceptable explanation for the contradictions in Scripture. You've been told to have faith, to not question, to accept the mystery. But there was another interpretation, one that looked at the same evidence and came to a radically different conclusion, one that offered a logical explanation for why the Old and New Testament gods seem so different, one that provided a framework for understanding suffering, evil, and spiritual yearning that doesn't require believing a perfect God intentionally created an imperfect universe. And that interpretation was so threatening to institutional power that it had to be completely destroyed. Ask yourself why. Why were these books burned? Why were these teachers executed? Why was this knowledge suppressed with such violence and thoroughness? If Gnostic theology was simply incorrect, why not debate it, refute it with better arguments, let it fade away naturally as false ideas do? Why the fear? Why the desperate effort to ensure no one could even read the texts and decide for themselves? Perhaps because the Gnostic claim is true. The monad remains hidden because its truth, that divine power is within you, that the creator of this flawed world is not the supreme God, that institutional religion is part of the control system keeping you asleep, is still too dangerous to the established material order. The ultimate freedom is the realization of the divine spark within yourself, not granted by an external authority, not mediated through institutions, not dependent on believing the right doctrines or performing the right rituals, just awakening, recognition, gnosis. The Demiurge's power is maintained through ignorance. The Archon's gates are held shut by fear and false belief. The material prison remains locked as long as you identify with your body, your social role, your material achievements, as long as you worship the wrong God through pistis rather than discovering the true God through gnosis. But the key has always been in your hand. The divine spark has always been within you. The path home to the pleroma has always been available. The search for the true God, the monad, the perfect hidden source of all spiritual reality, doesn't begin in churches or sacred texts or mystical experiences, though it may be aided by any of these. It begins and ends in the same place, within your own consciousness, where a fragment of divine light has been trapped in matter since the catastrophic moment of Sophia's error, waiting patiently through countless lifetimes for you to remember what you really are. The true God is hidden from the Demiurge who doesn't know it exists, hidden from the Archons who fear its liberating power, hidden from material consciousness which cannot perceive spiritual perfection. But it's not hidden from you, not if you choose to look, not if you dare to question the authorities who tell you not to question, not if you're willing to consider that the God you've been taught to worship might not be God at all. The monad is silent, transcendent, and perfect. It makes no demands, it offers no threats, it requires no worship. It simply waits, beyond the seven heavens, beyond the Archon's gates, beyond the Demiurge's limited domain, in the perfect spiritual fullness of the pleroma, for its scattered fragments to remember their origin and return home. That return is gnosis. That return is salvation. That return is the hidden truth that was suppressed for 2,000 years. And now you know. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. If this exploration has challenged your understanding of Christianity, of God, of spiritual reality itself, leave a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Remember, the kingdom is already within you. You just have to wake up. Until next time, keep questioning. Good night.